This edition of Tech Talk is brought to you by GlobalSpeak.com, new media consultants, corporate video and audio communications, video and audio production and distribution, live and virtual event production. Tag TV and Tag Radio is a service of GlobalSpeak.com, creatively delivering powerful marketing, video, and audio solutions. Tom, welcome to Tech Talk.
Frank, how are you?
Just great, Tom. And one of the things I think our audience should realize is that you are, I guess, partly a product of the technology community in Atlanta, being involved in it for so many years and still being pretty much so young. And I don't mean to make that a judgment, but an observation. You're doing some great things early in your career. But I think that what is really interesting is the perspective that you have that not only comes from an expertise in the area of marketing and a mix with technology, but also having watched the evolution of the whole technology industry kind of happen over the last decade or so, and you being there with it, helping it to happen, as well as being a participant, and also obviously as an entrepreneur and taking advantage of it. So I'm really interested in some insights from a general perspective, more thought leadership than anything. So let's talk a little bit about change in particular. The last decade or so, certainly you've seen lots of change over the years, but maybe benchmark a couple of things.
Sure. Yeah, one of the interesting things about kind of the early 2000s, I was working with a company in town called TechLinks. We were a marketing services firm that focused primarily on the technology industry. We worked with IT service providers across Georgia and helping them figure out their messaging and how they were going to sell to, CIOs and IT departments, primarily with Fortune 1000 companies. And, at the time, there were all these buzzwords going around about, SEO and social media, this new thing. And, at the time, it was so early and companies were trying to figure out, should we try this? Should we not try this? And, some jumped in, some kind of held back and watched some succeed and others fail and try to learn from them and then jump in. Whereas, now those are a lot of these, at the time, what were called technologies aren't really even called technologies anymore. They're just things that we all use on a day-to-day basis. And, brands, companies that started trying them out 10, 15 years ago now just view them as part of their day-to-day business. And I think seeing the digital media just kind of emerge and mature over the last 10, 15 years has been pretty phenomenal.
I'm kind of a madman, old school advertising agency background. You mentioned TechLinks, Mike Atkinson, a long-time good friend. I would identify him as literally one of the pioneers of what we would now call Atlanta's tech community and tech industry. So much was talked about in those early days, like you're talking about with SEO, and certainly now we've got it moved into analytics, and forget about big data. We're now into predictive and prescriptive analytics, and every purchase you make tells a story. I saw an ad the other day I thought was really interesting from a SEO company that specifically was talking about how much data and information is gathered and how that information is utilized. I guess where I'm headed is, let's talk a little bit about the traditional advertising evolution. Certainly left I would say a good decade or so ago. I think it's a part of what we would do from a marketing and outreach strategy, but certainly not the only thing. And let's talk about the how has not only the market, but how are the needs of the clients, your clients, changed, and of course, how are the consumers changed in terms of how they want to get their messages?
Yeah, good question. I think, maybe reversing the answer to your question, we're always focused on what the consumer wants, expects, and needs. And, one of the big things that's changed over the last 10, 15 years, especially coming from your background and others from the, traditional advertising world is, used to, there was very much kind of a shotgun approach to marketing. Get a message that's, as widespread and, cast as big of a net as possible, and hopefully some consumers fall in and you sell some product or service or whatever it is that your company does. And now, consumers expect a lot more. They are not paying attention to, the thousands of global messages that they're getting on a day-to-day basis. They want that one-to-one personal relationship with each brand. Imagine going to Amazon.com, 10 years ago, and on the front page you saw, basically all the New York Times bestsellers, when they were primarily selling books. And it didn't matter who you were. But over the last 10, 15 years, they've evolved just like many online brands have evolved. And when you get to Amazon.com, you expect to see products that are relevant just to you based on your purchase activity, based on other sites you visited, based on searches, overall just based on the profile and the data that Amazon's been collecting on you since you've been a user. And that's really what the consumers are expecting at this point. So, brands are having to get really smart about not just coming up with, a cool slogan and a jingle or something, but they're really having to start figuring out, how do I have a personal relationship with each and every one of our consumers?
We talk about disruption. In fact, one of the things we talk often about on Tech Talk is semantics, and how semantics just can't keep up with the technological change. Clouds and Internet of Things coming up, high-speed connectivity, some of that stuff, data we talked about a couple of minutes ago, in terms of now analytics. So much of what's happening is changing so rapidly that even the disruption is happening within ecosystems. Like, for example, you mentioned Amazon, the impact on retailing and the whole impact on even, for example, commercial real estate and the shopping mall, and the evolution of what's having to be done in order to attract the millennium or Gen X. That is a different kind of mentality, a different kind of shopper. From a B2B perspective, let's talk about some of the larger factors playing into how marketers are using technology, utilizing technology specifically in terms of not only the B2B space, but reaching this kind of a elusive audience. We know more about them, but how do we find them? How do we get to them?
I think part of it's about understanding the behaviors of your buyers, whether it's B2B or B2C, but we have a pretty good idea as marketers now where our buyers are. If you're very clear and deliberate about defining who your buyers are, and you've done your research and know why people buy your product, it's fairly easy and actually fairly inexpensive now. It didn't used to be, but it is now, to find where your market is online. And when I say online, that means what they're doing on their mobile devices, what they're doing on their desktops or PCs at work or laptops, or just from digital kiosks or anything else. But we have beacon technology. We know what stores you're walking into. We know what you're doing on social media, and based on that, we can come up with personalized, localized content that targets you specifically as a buyer of a B2B service, as a buyer of a new stroller for your infant, or whatever it is, and then ultimately use the plethora of tools and technologies to reach out to you however you want to be reached as a consumer, whether it be through the mobile device, whether it be through an app, whether it be through email, digital advertising, or whatever you ultimately tend to react to. We have a pretty good idea of what that's going to be, and then can target messaging through whatever media you consume in a way that drives you to what you expect to find from a content messaging perspective.
Is it always hyper-custom? Is it a case where in some cases there are some, let's say, primary disruptors that you could identify? What would be some of the bigger disruptors in, say, marketing technology? But I'll put you on the spot, not only today, but let's take a look in the future. You've mentioned several, but maybe identify what you would say is the bigger of the disruptors, if there is such a thing, the biggest disruptor, but also not only as it is today, but maybe take a look in the near future. One of the things we say is that it's so 20 minutes ago. I don't know how much further you can go ahead and predict anything anymore, but let's go ahead and talk a little bit about disruption now and in the future.
Sure. One of the things you actually brought up a little bit earlier, typically, at least in our world, technology is innovating way faster than marketers are, than marketing strategy is. And so, as an example, personalized content. The technology for personalized content has existed for years. I remember back in 2005, 2006, you could fairly easily say, if somebody clicks on this on my website, then show them this content. If they click on that, show them that content. So it's existed for years, but marketers are just now getting around to realizing the impact of that technology and how it impacts the relationship with their consumers. So, personalized content is huge. Again, going back to the Amazon example, why show a consumer content or products or services or whatever that they're not interested in when we have the tools and technology to show them products and services that we know they're interested in, and ultimately can get better conversion rates, better, click-throughs, downloads, whatever the KPIs are that you're looking to drive. And so again, there's kind of two answers to the question. What is, what are the disruptors in technology that may impact marketing strategy 3 to 5 years from now? The second question is, what tools and technologies have already existed out there for years that we as marketers are just, getting smarter about how to use? And I think, localized content, personalized content are going to be key driving us into 2017. Brands, are already starting to suffer from, not innovating using some of these technologies where, a consumer at this point expects, once they hit your site to know, for your site to know who I am and what I'm looking for. Best Buy is a good example. They just relaunched a new site, and they started testing some personalized and localized content both a few years ago, but never really jumped in with both feet. And, their new site now, once you're logged in, once they know who you are, it's, a lot more similar to like an Amazon experience where they're showing you products and services just related to you. And again, the consumer's starting to demand this to a point where the consumers are rebelling, and a lot of these brands that they've worked with for years and years or purchased from, they're no longer interacting with, and they're finding new products and new services that will interact with them the way that they now expect to be engaged with.
It's kind of an interesting concept, something that I'd love to talk to you about in another opportunity to Tech Talk, and that is, what does brand mean anymore? And how long does brand have an established message of trust or value or whatever the positioning message is? Because like what you say, so much is happening now in terms, again, of the millennium or Generation Xers whose shopping experience deals with a lot more trust than it necessarily has predetermined or preconditioned messaging that has them branding a particular product as one better than the other. I think they're value-driven, certainly, and obviously price matters, and they don't want to get involved in something that doesn't satisfy their need. But the other side of it is, how do you know? How do you know anymore? And I'm not asking the question, I'm posing the fact that I think branding in the future really is interesting, and just exactly how do you build brand, and for how long can you really maintain it when you're dealing in a disruptive environment that innovation drives. It's going to be kind of an interesting thing to see. That said, one of the things I do want to bring up is that you're also an entrepreneur. I'm going to guess it's probably been, I can't even believe it's been 7 years ago with Swarm. I'm trying to remember.
Yeah, 8 years. That's right.
Wow. Well, tell us a little bit, just real quickly about that, because I think Swarm is you're doing a lot of smart things, a lot of good things for clients, pushing the envelope, doing some things that I think are traditional and performance-based, proof of concept without question. Yet the other side, there's some edgy creative things that you don't see everywhere. So tell us a little bit about Swarm, just a short bit, and maybe how that's changed for you over the years.
Sure. One of the big things that I see as my job and as our company's job for our clients is education. And, one of the biggest things that we talk about is pushing the envelope and figuring out how does Swarm be the catalyst of change for our clients. And the reason for that is because it goes back to actually a statement you just made. How do we maintain brand, or how do we build brand, et cetera? One of the things that's changed over the last 10 years is companies have lost control of their own brands. They, used to, again, traditional advertising days, the company would, hire some internal creative directors and some brand managers and things like that. They would all sit around a table and say, okay, here's our, brand value, and here's our mission statement, and here's our tagline, and then let's just push it out to consumers and hope they trust us, which, again, 20 years ago, consumers really didn't have that much of a choice but to trust you because they couldn't verify, or, they would purchase product. And yes, there's word of mouth, but it can only travel so far. Now, your brand is totally defined by your customers. You can say whatever you want as a, Target or Home Depot or Delta or whatever, but at the end of the day, nothing that those brands say from the company to the consumer matter. What the consumer says about the company to their friends, to their online networks and through forums and ratings and all these different things that exist, that defines your brand. And so part of what I think has changed a lot, and part of our job, as a marketing agency, is to educate some of our more traditional clients that are used to operating under one set of rules, our job is to educate them on how to basically tear up the rule book and rebuild it based on, the next generation consumer.
One of the things, again, with Tech Talk is we don't deal with a single vertical as far as the technology industry. We go horizontally and talk to everyone. And as you do, there's so much the same, only different, if you will, because they utilize a lot of the same technologies, a lot of the same basic marketing, but the implementation of it becomes, somewhat custom based on what target audience and what technology and what area of growth and evolution has occurred during whatever period of time. And I guess one of the things that is kind of challenging is it really is interesting when we talk about brand and we talk about digital marketing consulting. I think in so many cases you've got first-generation entrepreneurs, you've got top chief executives and senior management positions. It really doesn't make any difference. The fact of the matter is, in many cases, they don't know what they don't know. And so that, the real challenge is for them to go out and find a solution when they don't even realize they have a problem. In many cases, we'll talk to IT consultants, and they'll constantly talk about the latest, new, and greatest thing that's available. And you think to yourself, well, how in the world can a poor entrepreneur or a poor enterprise executive who's running an operation, remember, running an operation isn't out there looking as to what's next and evaluating the last thing that he just got through purchasing because a new one has come out that's faster and less expensive to operate. Interesting challenge from a marketing perspective. We're coming to a close, but as we do, I got one other question. I think our audience would be upset if I didn't throw at you, and we mentioned a little bit about the future, but let's get down to some real predictions as far as the changes that you see coming in 2017, next year. What's the impact as far as marketing and technology worlds?
Good question. I think, the biggest thing that's starting to emerge now, it's already been happening in 2016, but I think 2017 will have a bigger impact. Tactics by themselves are mattering less and less and less. They, again, 10, 15 years ago, companies are going, I got to have SEO, I got to have social media, I got to have email, whatever. Now, it doesn't matter. All of those things have been commoditized. Again, any entrepreneur or anybody sitting at home with a laptop can fire up an email campaign by signing up for, some email service for $8.99 a month. Mm-hmm. The tactics by themselves don't matter anymore. It's ultimately defining what the relationship should look like between you and a consumer, you and your B2B prospect, and then defining how do I want to communicate with them one-on-one, directly speaking to whatever the need they're trying to solve is. And so, while some of the tactics still have to happen, you still want to show up in search engines, for instance, but doing all this crazy, coding and back-end technologies and everything to try to trick the search engines into, putting you at the top of the list isn't going to work anymore. Even the search engines have gotten smarter, and they're looking at the same thing that we're talking about here. They're looking at user experience. They're looking at when a user lands on your website or a user goes to your mobile app, whatever, how good is that experience and how much are you building a relationship with them? Are they getting personalized content that's just relevant to them, or are they getting just some global message that goes out to the masses? And so I think, again, back to your question, local content, personalized content, I think 2017 is going to be the year that content becomes truly king.
Well, Tom, exciting stuff. Hear a lot of good things about the Swarm Agency, a lot of buzz. I mean, obviously the bottom line for anyone that's listening that gets involved in these areas is generalist. It's one of those deals where I think they say a lawyer who has himself as a lawyer is a fool or something. I can't remember the cliche, but anyone that's trying to navigate through marketing and marketing technology and the kind of things that we're talking about today by themselves, it's simply not necessary, certainly when you've got a trusted performer the way you guys are at the Swarm Agency. Tom, thanks a lot for taking time out of what I know is an extremely busy schedule with all the things that you guys have got going on over there, but to spend a couple of minutes sharing some things with us today on Tech Talk.
Frank, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. And, if any of your viewers have any other questions or comments, feel free to visit our website at swarmagency.com.